Outside of work, Sean's been a drummer for 42 years in the band Underground Zero in the genre of space rock, who in the 1980s knocked off the Smiths from the #1 spot in the independent chart. They recently put out a new album, but they're not currently touring or playing. However, he's currently a drummer in a folk duo, Cruel Folk, which are currently playing if you'd like to see him in the UK or Europe. So, speaking today on proving theorems, still a major test for AI, Dr. Sean Holden.
To this day, I enjoy imagining the Smiths looking at the chart that day and thinking, who? Anyway, okay, this has been interesting. Thanks to Vlad for inviting me. I feel a little bit out of place because I think I might be the only person who doesn't work for a startup in the room at the moment. Oh, there are two of us. Okay. Well, blame the darkness on us because we're academics and.
It's not a startup.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, fair enough. But you can blame us academics for the lack of light because bright light makes our skin blister. So, it's much more comfortable for us. I'll give you some background. I'm a very lucky boy. I currently work in the computer science department at Cambridge. It's probably got a good claim to be the oldest computer science department in the world because it started off as the mathematical laboratory when Maurice Wilkes and David Wheeler were kind of the first people to really start putting large machines involving valves together and doing interesting things with them. And in fact, when I got my current appointment, one of the first introductions I got was, allow me to introduce David Wheeler. He invented the subroutine. So the place has a good history. But it also, oh, hello. Right. Give me a minute while I get Actually, that's almost a disappointment. I quite like this direct approach. I might just keep going. It's kind of nice. Keep going. Okay. So Cambridge is a great place to work. We have people right from the most theoretical niches of computer science you can think of, all the way up to the most applied things you can think of, and everything in between. Okay, so until recently, we had a head of department who was a founder of ARM. Guy in the office next door to me invented iris recognition. We have all sorts of great stuff going on. And I'm also really lucky because I work for Trinity College, and that's definitely not a startup. That's 16th century, founded by Henry VIII. We've had a few interesting people work there. Isaac Newton, I think he did all right. Having invented differentiation, I think he had quite a big sort of influence on what we're trying to do here. But yeah, it's an interesting place to work. If you can get the slides up, I will probably use them. Thanks. Okay, but I've actually been doing machine learning research since 1989. So as of this year, it's 30 years. And 1989, when I got initially interested in this stuff, was the last time that neural networks were causing everyone excitement. So I've sort of seen this come and go. Does anyone want to hazard a guess as to why, in the 90s, when we were setting up the master's degree in intelligent systems, we called it the master's degree in intelligent systems? The reason is AI was so uncool at the time that if we'd have called it the master's degree in AI, we'd never have got funding for it. So this thing really has come through a massive cycle. Excellent, thank you. I'll do this halfway. Okay, while that's happening, I'll do this as a halfway house. I'll have the slides, but I'll keep shouting. My students tell me I'm really good at that. So, when I got started, neural networks were sort of once again a big thing. So I got really interested in the underlying theory because although you could do interesting things with them, no one really quite understood what was going on. So I spent several years doing mostly stuff on sample complexity of learning, which is just a way of saying you want to kind of come up with theorems that should tell you about how much data you need in order to achieve a particular level of performance. Okay, so I did lots of stuff on that. And interestingly, that was a great time because that body of mathematics was what led Vacnik and Shervin-Jenkins and co. really to do the foundations for support vector machines. So that was nice. We also got quite heavily involved, partly as a purely research thing, and partly in setting up the master's program with about 15 companies. I mean, GlaxoSmithKline was one of them, but also Unilever and Rolls-Royce, and Autonomy and a whole bunch of others. And we were doing quite a lot of different applied bits of work with them, and particularly I did a lot of work on drug design, on high throughput screening with Glaxo and co. And then even more recently, working with the biochemists in Cambridge, doing data analysis for organelle proteomics, which means if you've got a cell, how do you work out where all the proteins are inside it? This is really hard because proteins are kind of small. And also they move around, depending on the level of development that the cell has gone through so far. And they also have to be in the right places at the right times, because they have specific jobs to do. And some of them are moonlighting, which means that depending on where you are in the cell cycle, they'll go to one place or a different place and have two different jobs. Okay? And you have this tiny, tiny little thing that you can't directly look at, but you want to work out where the proteins are. So we did lots of work with those, doing data fusion from experimental data and some stuff from online ontologies, trying to work out better ways of finding where proteins are. And on top of all that, my group also does various other things in Bayesian inference and protein interaction and analysing gene expression data and so on and so on. So that's kind of my 30-year background in playing with machine learning. Now, more recently, I've it's not actually more recent, I've always been interested in this, but it's just sort of come back at a point in my life when I can really give it some attention. I'm interested in how can you apply machine learning to do mathematics? And I have, oops. Do you have a laser? Yes. Oh, it's in here, okay, good. And here I have, I like to be old school, you see, because I've only got one hidden layer here, rather than lots of them. I've actually been interested in this for a really long time, and it's sort of become even more interesting to me now because it feels like it's a bit of an elephant in the room. Okay, the inability of AI to actually do proper mathematics presents a massive and, to me, really interesting challenge. So let me just say something about why I got interested in this in the first place. Okay, when I was at school doing my A-levels, a rather excellent A-level teacher introduced me to Principia Mathematica. Who knows about Principia Mathematica? A few people, okay. This was a series of 3 books published by some alumni of Trinity College, Russell and Whitehead, 3 volumes in 1910, 12 and 13. And what they wanted to do was show that all of mathematics is essentially expressible in nothing but logic. And if you've never seen this and you have a kind of mathematical, intellectual mindset, I urge you to look at some of this stuff because the book, the first volume, it's a magnificent achievement. It's just extraordinary. Even Bertrand Russell himself said that it took so much out of him to publish these 3 volumes that after they were published, he was never the same man again. It's an amazing thing. And very famously, they start with incredibly basic logical axioms and then build systematically. You start with logical axioms and ways that you can combine things you know to make new things that are then defensively true. And starting on that very straightforward basis, they built and built and built. And very famously, on page 83 of volume 2, got to the result 1 + 1 = 2. With a very pithy comment to the effect that occasionally this proposition comes in useful. And why is that interesting? Well, it's interesting because the take-home message is that doing mathematics properly is really hard. You know, if you actually want to be certain about what you're doing and you really understand what underlies this stuff, it's really difficult. It can be really, really complicated. And the reason that takes up until page 83 of volume 2 is that to prove that 1 plus 1 equals 2, you have to define what 1 means. And it's not as easy as you think. Okay? But that's maybe an extreme. From our perspective, though, you can mechanize this, and people have mechanized Principia Mathematica. Okay? And they've gone through and reproduced proofs. And in some cases, made the proofs a little bit shorter. But the fact remains that even though you can axiomatize it, and you can write programs that try to prove theorems, and people have been doing it certainly since the 1950s with the general problem solver, which has its own special place in the history of AI. Computers have not so far really produced original and interesting mathematics. Now I'm going to be very clear about something here. I am not making the claim today that computers can't prove theorems, okay? Because that would be silly. Computers can prove theorems, and they've been doing it for decades. I'm making a distinction. Okay? Computers can prove theorems, but what they don't seem to be very good at all is doing interesting mathematics of the kind that would impress a mathematician. That's a different problem. Okay? And that's much harder than just basically starting with axioms and having code that churns out theorems on that basis. All right? So, why is this hard? Well, I hope I don't just lose everyone by introducing some actual maths here. Who here knows about propositional logic? Quite a few, that's good. If you don't know about propositional logic, this is really easy to explain, but it's also a problem that's tremendously hard in practice to solve on a large scale. Okay? I can give you variables which I can label as being true or false. Okay? You can call them what you like. Fred and Anthea, they can be assigned true or false. If I have two of them, then I can combine them with an AND operation. Okay? And the combination is true precisely when both the variables are true. And similarly with OR, that comes out true if one or the other or both of the variables are true. And not just flips the variable. And then you can combine these together in any way you like. Okay? And that gives you a formula like this one. x1 or x2, bracketed, and x3. And I can make that true in various different ways by saying, well, this is an AND operation, so the things on both sides have to be true, so x3 has to be true. And then to make this true, I can have x1 true or x2 or both, and I'm happy. And that's easy. But if I give you an arbitrary formula with a million variables in it, it's not quite so easy at all. And in fact, it's a standard famous result in computational complexity, that there is no known method of solving this problem that can guarantee to be better than looking through all 2 to the power of n ways of assigning true and false to n variables and seeing if a truth pops out. Okay? And 2 to the power of a million is quite a big number. It's a very, very big number indeed, if you actually want to go through all those possibilities. It's well beyond anything you can build. But interestingly, in the last 10 or 15 years or so, some really clever techniques have come about that have allowed you to solve problems of that scale as SAT problems within a reasonable amount of time. And that's been incredibly useful because you can make a whole lot of really interesting and important applied problems in computing into a SAT problem. Okay? You can, for example, use this system to prove that your design for a microprocessor meets its specification. You take the design, you take the spec, you produce an absolutely humongous SAT problem, and if you can solve it and find a satisfying assignment, you know your processor meets its specification, and that's the kind of thing that this gets applied to. But it is difficult, okay? And it's difficult for the same reason that a lot of problems in AI are difficult, because they come out to being searches in incredibly large search spaces. Here the search space is, how do I set these things to be true and false? But that's the simplest possible logic, and we can take it up a step. If we take it up a step, we get, well, this probably requires a little explanation. This is me when I was younger, and not so hairy. I will thank someone from my past, who I will not name here, for giving me the gift of this example in what's now called first order logic, or predicate logic. I first had an ear pierced in England in the early 1980s. And at that time, for a man to have an ear pierced was regarded as quite shocking, shall we say. So I got a lot of this. And the person I'm thinking of didn't actually use the word weirdo. He used two words, and neither of them could be repeated here for the sake of political incorrectness. Okay, but we'll leave it at that. So I can formalize this. Now my logic is a bit more interesting. It says, for all things x, if x is pierced and x is male, then x is a weirdo. And I also have to know that Sean is pierced and Sean is male. So can I prove from this little logical basis that I'm indeed a weirdo? And the answer is yes, I can. Yay! And there's a systematic way in which you can go about doing this, which is you can turn those logical expressions into something slightly simpler up here. I'm not going to say exactly what the mechanism is, but then you play this game of matching them. So the ones that are negated, I want to match with the ones that aren't. So I can match, Sean is pierced here with not x is pierced. And when I do this matching, I can fill in the variables to make the two expressions actually match. So I make x equals Sean, and I also delete from this guy the thing I've matched, and I also delete this guy. But I keep a copy of it nonetheless. And I do this systematically, and the game involves trying to get to something empty, okay, an empty collection of things, at which point I've proved what I was setting out to prove. But this is even harder than the satisfiability case, okay? In order to do this, you end up with a situation where, firstly, you've always got to make choices about which two things you pair up in order to try and eliminate something. And each time you do it, the collection of clauses you can choose from gets bigger, okay? Because this guy gets made from those two, and then I can also consider this when matching things up. So this thing grows, and it grows without limit, okay? Now, board games for a long time were a big issue for AI. The branching factor in board games is, of course, quite large. If you've got a chessboard, it's got 64 positions on it, and the branching factor, well, roughly you might expect it's in the 30s or something. In Go, it's like 180 to 200 or something like that. In this, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. It grows, and there's no limit on how far it can grow. And even worse, there is actually no way of writing a program that guarantees to solve this. This is another fundamental thing in the theory of computation. You can write something which will find a proof if there is one, and it will always be right. But if there isn't a proof, it will never guarantee to find the fact that there is no proof. That can just keep going and going forever. Okay? So you're dealing with a search space then that makes board games look well, like toys, okay? Which is fair enough. And that's why this is these problems are fundamentally rather difficult to solve. And the question then is, can you do something about that? And there's also a little sub-question here, which is, have they actually ever proved anything of interest? Well, the answer is they proved one thing. If you ask a mathematician, what of interest have actual automated theorem provers proved, and one thing they'll come up with is the Robbins conjecture, which was an interesting problem for mathematicians, and they didn't know how to prove it, and it came out of a theorem prover called EQP, driven by William McLuhan published in '97. And it took about a week, and the proof isn't that long, it's 15 lines or something. But it's an example of an actual mathematical theorem proved by an AI system. So why do we have a problem? Well, the problem is that it's pretty much the only one. And if you ask a mathematician, it's not regarded as a sort of huge deal as a result in itself. And you can sort of see, because of the way that the Theorem proof works, that it's really just come from a brute force search. And it doesn't look like the sort of thing a mathematician would come up with. So, like I said, this is a bit of an elephant in the room. Computers have been used to prove theorems for decades, okay? But only one thing that's really of interest to mathematicians is popped out, okay? And that should present a challenge to us. Well, it does. And sort of recently, this has had a little bit of new impetus. Okay, people did try putting machine learning into theorem provers back in the 1980s. And it seems to me that they came across the same kind of problem that you came across with a lot of kind of big, interesting challenges back then, which was just lack of sufficient memory and computing bang to do anything useful. Okay, well, now things have sort of changed again. We've had a bit of a shift in what is feasible to try. And so people have started doing a lot more of this. So there's lots of work around now on putting machine learning into automated theorem provers. I'm not going to talk about it all because I want to talk about something we did, because that's what I'm interested in. We found that by taking one of the state-of-the-art ones, called E, we could actually, using relatively straightforward methods, get quite a nice demonstration that there's enough information kicking around in the statement of a theorem for a machine learner to do something useful with it. So what we did was we took E. Now E has to solve this problem of picking which things to resolve next and then dealing with the explosion that happens in the number of choices that you then have to make. It's got a collection of 82 heuristics, or probably more now. This was an earlier version. So a heuristic is like, if you like, a rule of thumb for choosing how to get further forward through this proof. It uses 82 of them, and we found that just by using an existing big collection of automated proofs called TP, thousands of problems for theorem provers, you can train actually relatively sort of straightforward methods, only support vector machines and Gaussian process classifiers, to do the same job to the same, with the same capabilities with only 5 of them. Now what that tells you is that there's enough information to do interesting things here. Okay, so that's quite a nice thing. And we have ongoing work trying to do similar things with other methods, as do people in other groups. Now, that's one point at which you can try and put machine learning in order to solve this problem. Okay, but I think that the fact that really there's so little actual interesting mathematics that's come out of this means that actually is really hard and is probably not going to happen for a while yet. But there's another place within the work of practicing mathematicians that you can try and make use of machine learning to help them along. And that's in formal verification of the proofs. So I'm going to tell you about another interesting thing in mathematics. And it's something called the classification theorem for finite simple groups. And it's quite big. Anyone who knows about this will know where this is going. The classification, you don't need to understand what it means, all right? Every finite simple group is isomorphic to a cyclic group with prime order and alternating group with degree greater than equals 5, a group of Lie type, or one of 26 sporadic groups. Which is quite a mouthful. But the thing with this is it's been proved by human mathematicians. No one knows how long the proof is because it's at least 10,000 pages. It took decades, it's scattered across numerous journal articles. After it was announced, they realised there was a gap in it, which took another 7 years and 1,200 plus pages to fix. There's currently a big effort underway to shorten it. And if you look on Amazon, you can currently find 8 volumes of the short proof, and I think they're going to need another 5. The question is this proof correct? What do you think? Well, maybe, hopefully you realised that I'd hidden something here. There's a little tiny error in the background. The question whether proofs of that scale are correct is an interesting one. The mathematicians seem quite happy that there's nothing to worry about here, but I'm sceptical and I'm not so certain. So the other point at which you can try and do interesting things for mathematics right now is in proof checking, automated proof checking. Okay, so there are also systems, and the one that's come out of my colleague Larry Paulson has been responsible for most of the development of this. It's called Isabel. What this allows you to do is try and actually write down proofs, but in a particular structured language that can then give you a formal guarantee that your proof is correct. Now, that's been applied probably an awful lot more than the classical automated theorem proving stuff has in doing actual mathematics, because that's been used to formalize large bodies of existing mathematics, and also some more directly applied stuff like formally verifying the design for a microkernel in an operating system. Okay, so this is useful stuff, and now there's the archive of formal proofs and some other archives for different systems that present formally verified mathematics. Okay, this ought to be something that mathematicians find useful, but it's not, for a reason I'll come on to as my finishing point. But this gives us another way in which we can put machine learning in, because what we can do now, and what we're working on at the moment, with various others who are interested in this, is lemma recommendation. What that means is that you're sitting there, you have some big gnarly proof that you're trying to work on. You want to prove something, and you're trying to use one of these proof checkers to make progress with it. Because there are these big databases of known results, you can use those as training data. You know, in a result that's already been proven, what earlier results were used to prove it, and what earlier results were used to prove those, and so on. So you can use this as training data and try and use machine learning to suggest what existing results you might want to try and apply to prove the thing you're currently working on. Okay? So that's another thing of interest, and I'm aware that I'm a little short of time. In fact, it says time's up, it's shouting at me. I don't like that. Right, so I'll be quick. So another thing we're interested in a minute is precisely this. This is quite fun. There are already engines that try and do lemma recommendation, but we're now using machine learning to try and tune them, okay? Because we have the training data that tells us what results were used in what proofs. We can then try and use that in something called Bayesian optimization, which I haven't got time to go into, to try and tune those techniques to actually work better. And that's yielding some quite nice results at the moment. So, the take-home message here, really, and I've tried to fit a lot into half an hour here. Not too much, I hope. But the take-home message is, this is a really interesting thing if you want a big challenge with machine learning, okay? Mathematicians are not easily impressed, but if you can come up with something that takes the big body of work in artificial intelligence going back to the 50s and all the machine learning stuff, certainly since the 1980s, where people have tried to apply it, and actually get it to a point where it proves something new that mathematicians didn't know and that looks significant to them, that would be a massive step forward for AI, okay? And I think that's really what I'm trying to impress here. Now, finally and quickly, why don't mathematicians use these proof systems very much? The answer is they don't want to learn a new language, okay? In order to use proof systems, you need to work in a kind of logic-like language, like on the slides that I was showing you earlier. And mathematicians like to write in pen and actually write things down in something that looks like natural language. So there's an even harder problem. And this has only been looked at really quite recently, and this is really hard. Can you come up with a way of writing mathematics that looks like the way people write it and is also formally verifiable? If you want a challenge, then that's a humdinger, okay? And I'll leave you with it. And if anyone gets anywhere near, please tell me, because I'd love to know how to do it. That's it.